And welcome back to the Truth in This Art. Thank you for joining me for my conversations bridging arts, culture, and community. I am your host, Rob Lee. And before we start, I'd like to remind you to visit my website, thetruthinThisArt.com, for more episodes, our full archive, and to subscribe to our newsletter for the latest updates. Thank you in advance. Today, I have a special guest for a special conversation. My guest is a Los Angeles-based artist whose vibrant tuft rug art pieces are a new form of folk art. These large-scale pieces simultaneously explore two realms of the female experience, joy and pain, and are packed with instinctual color choices that make them visually arresting. Please welcome Liv Aanrud. Welcome to the podcast.
Hi, thank you. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for coming on. Thank you for making the time. As you could probably tell in my less than professional attire right now, I'm wearing a tank top because I'm schwitzing over here. I'm sweating my existence away. So yeah, we're recording this during the summer. Good times.
It's hot. It's July. It's hot. Oh,
absolutely.
Yeah.
So as we start, one of the things I always like to do, and it rolls, it makes sense. I'd like to invite you to introduce yourself, tell us a bit about your work. And I read a bit about your grandmother, as far as an influence when it comes to your art and your early life. So I want to open it up right there if we can start off with a few of those items.
Okay, yeah. So my name is Liv Aanrud, and I live in Los Angeles. I'm a textile artist. I basically making figurative work that is really maximalist, and there's a lot of like language symbolism, things within the figure that kind of build out this specific kind of world that they all exist in. And I guess I think they sit somewhere in between painting and textile in terms of how they're interpreted and where they sit in context with other art that I'm looking at. And but yeah, my grandmother, when I was very young, I grew up on a farm, and my dad we were about 5 miles away from her house. So I grew up spending a lot of time there while my mom was teaching. And then also while my dad was working in the field, he would, leave me there a lot of the time. And so I spent a lot of time with her. Just, she would draw with me. And that was like the first person that kind of really showed me a little bit more about drawing and kind of was really looking at it in a way. And so that always has a place in my identity or sense of like upbringing. She's a big part of that. And even I just remember one time I was drawing something where I think it was it was water, and then she thought it was a sky. And I remember thinking I'm not going to correct her because I would never do that. But then it made me look at it again and think, oh, maybe she sees something I don't. And so there were these little moments of even just being very young and thinking, changing how the idea of you could see something in multiple ways, and like what is something like art. But then later when she died when I was 12, but then later when I was in grad school, so I had done my undergrad and graduate work in painting. So I really come from this textiles through painting. But I did find a piece that she had made, and I'm not exactly sure when, I guess probably the 40s. And so by finding this piece that to me, I was making abstract paintings. And so this was this abstract textile piece. And it's basically the very simple setup. It's, like a potato sack, and then everything's cut up, and it's all fabric that would have been in her life. I mean, she grew up in the Great Depression. And then, you have the Dust Bowl, and they're farmers. So like those were not easy years. And so after that, I think, pretty traumatized, honestly, and never threw anything out. So that was one of the things about growing up, is there was always these history of things, and it wasn't, people didn't have money, and they weren't things that were expensive, but it was like things that meant something, and also maybe you need them again. So finding this piece, it was like a portrait of a self-sufficiency, of kind of like how somebody operated in the world by taking things and reusing them, but also maybe this desire to make something that was a little bit, changed it, so it's like it was started off as maybe a dish towel and a dress you liked, and now it's this piece that is functional. So it's kind of that thinking, and also just something beautiful. Yeah. So finding that, it was like this way of connecting to the place where I'm from. And I think when I was in grad school, it was hard to find my voice because I was in a lot of other artists, and they knew I guess maybe more contemporary art, they knew who owned which gallery and all these different things in the New York art scene, where I was thinking, man, I don't know all of these things. And so I'm kind of laid low, doing my own thing, trying to figure out what to say in these conversations and what I know and what I don't know. But finding that, it kind of gave me this link, and it gave me this way of kind of thinking like, okay, I do have a little bit of an unusual background. Not that farming would be, but these days I think it's not as easy everything's corporate. It's very hard to survive. And that way of living is probably, I wouldn't say it's gone, but it's much more rare. So yeah, I think it was like a way of connecting with her. Also a way of, connecting with like a lineage of women in my family. And then also just the labor of it. When I started making paintings of it, I was really looking at it as like doing a portrait of what I perceive as a portrait of her. It's like, it's her thinking, right? It's this abstract piece. So it doesn't look like anything particularly, but what it could be is a map of thinking. It could be a moment where she's maybe letting her mind wander. And, if you had the time to do it back then with everyone in your house always wanting something, because it was packed and there were a lot of people there. So I thought of it as like a different kind of portrait of a person that I wish I could talk to, as an artist or as an adult. And so it kind of started there. And then I started just making I looked it up and I figured out how to do this kind of hooking technique. And once I started doing it, it really clicked back into like, I guess, the logic of growing up on a farm where you were expected to work, and where work, for better, for worse, was it was like part of your identity, to like to be perceived as lazy would be a really big problem. And so for me, it's just, I don't know, I get nervous about that. Like if somebody thinks I'm lazy, I'm like, oh God, no. And I don't know if some people would think, oh, who cares? Or maybe I am, or I don't know. But even the other day, I was just talking about my niece, and she's 16, and I was talking about things she's good at. And I'm like, she knows how to work. She can do this. She like the ability to work and help people and kind of be self-sufficient. And that's always kind of, I think, important. So when I started doing the actual physical hooking, it made it easier to sit down and make something that maybe doesn't have, like, it feels luxurious to work on art, right? It feels like I'm, so it's like, how do you sit and watch paint dry? I mean, I would have methods. I would have a hairdryer. I was racing around, but it connected to like my probably a little bit hyperactive personality, and kind of calming that down maybe, or focusing it. And then also just gave me something to do. And also a way of, it's meditative, it's therapeutic to do something like that. So once I started doing that, it kind of really dialed in kind of a philosophy and a way of working and living. And so that was 13 years ago that I started doing textiles. It was really right after grad school kind of stuff. And then I've been doing it ever since, really. So.
Thank you. Yeah. And see the cool thing, and I tell this to people, because this is a collaborative thing, right? Like, with that answer, that piece there kind of answered two other questions. So I could just remove those off the checklist. So shout out to you.
Cross them out.
And the other thing is, I like when, it's two things. When I read the piece about your grandmother, and kind of seeing that as one of those sort of, early points of that's perhaps where one of the sparks, or the spark, or what have you, was initially ignited. I started thinking of my own grandmother, where I have a sense of humor. I have too many, it's just teeth all the time over here. I'm just always smiling about something. And she would call me her laughing baby. Or this other thing where I wanted to be an illustrator before starting this. And it was always her kind of like, let me see what you drew. What's that? And just really on it. And just like supportive of it in that way, and not like, hey, really, focus on the book, hit the books and all of that. I was smart. I hit the books. I was good in that regard, but actually, pushing and giving me sort of that feedback that one needs to be an individual. And I'm into weird stuff. I'm for context, since this is visual, I've always been big. I'm 6'4", so I'm like a giant dude, right? And It's like, hey, play with this basketball. She's like, no, go in and draw. Keep drawing. Be an artist.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, you can't be tall without somebody forcing you into some like idea of a sport that's fun. But yeah, no, I think that idea of having a person who in your life that maybe it is because they're older and they just have a little bit of time to focus on you and to be positive. I mean, I see that with my mom and my nieces. You know, she's that person, and I think that was so important to have those afternoons where we could just slow down, spend some time working on these things. And she would, there was no, I mean, there was a TV, but it wasn't like you weren't set up in front of it. Like that wasn't an option. So it was making some food or cooking or taking walks, or she would show me around, you're out in the country, so you're looking at things. And I think all that observational time growing up in the country really informs my art and how I work, and that maybe wanting that desire to slow down again too, because it's definitely not just a city. I mean, Los Angeles is is fast, but even just like technology and the way that we are, visually kind of constantly inundated. I think that doing something that is a little tedious and slow is a little bit a conscious decision against that. Just a way to take back some amount of my brain, I guess, as much as I can, or my peace a little bit. It's hard
Certainly.
to find it.
And I think because you're originally from Wisconsin, no?
Yeah.
Yeah. So because I was like farms, I was like, I heard LA, and I was just like, where?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not on the farm anymore, that's for sure. Right now I'm in downtown Los Angeles, so I'm looking out the window at a totally different situation. But yeah, I grew up on a dairy farm in Wisconsin, as you do in the 80s. So I feel like it was a different place in a totally different time. And it is a lot about, I think, a lot of, as an artist, I think most people do have some connection to some part of their childhood, their memory, or what informs their work is often from your upbringing. And so for me, it definitely is about a very specific place, because there wasn't we didn't have a lot of money and we weren't traveling all over the place. We didn't go, we lived on a lake. You spent your days kind of in different areas. You go into the woods and read a book. It was you go sit and draw. And it wasn't we never really, not like we never went anywhere, but we weren't just getting driven around from activity to activity kind of thing. It was we'd go swimming and then sit somewhere else and kind of talk and read and think. And, it was a little bit lower key upbringing. Yeah.
I dig the low key. And, as I was sharing, with you before we got started, that trip I was on, it was a lot of activities. And I was like, I'm going to opt out of as many of these as possible, because I prefer sort of the low key, being able to literally turn off this brain of mine to maybe shift gears and do something else. And, the sort of the notion, and before I move into this next question, I definitely felt that. And you mentioned this notion of being called lazy or something like that. It definitely hits for me as well. I'm always a person who finds different ways, alternative ways to do things, get to the same answer, but I got a multitude of ways to get there. And sometimes it's the path of least resistance. Sometimes it's the way to turn it into a system or what have you. My day job, I'm a data analyst. I'm always problem solving. And I always take it as a strike when someone was like, you could have took 5 hours to do this and you did it in an hour. That seems a little lazy. I was like, feels efficient. And I'm always on task.
Whoa. Yeah.
So definitely it keys me. And even in doing this, I get a lot of content done. And I think, well, not even content. That's not the right term. That's social media brain rot. I think I get a lot of conversations done. I think I have a lot of interesting conversations with folks such as yourself. And in 5 years, coming up on 800 of these well-crafted research, all of that stuff, sort of interviews, and have all of the other things that one needs, it's you can get a lot done. And part of that comes from that upbringing of find ways to do things, find ways to solve those problems.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, and I'm sure, I think there's different ways of working, and the mental work of being an artist and the physical work of doing it. And you find different, sometimes I think it's always hard to, you're talking about taking breaks and, you know, getting out of your head and doing different things, but you're always kind of working out these issues and these problems. And I'm sure when you're not like in the studio talking to people, it's still like you're thinking about how, what a question would be, or, you know, everything kind of relates back. I'm sure you're reflecting on conversations you've had, and then it kind of, and you're talking to people all the time, I bet, you know, out in the world. So you're working on it, even, yeah, you're not lazy.
I keep a notepad next to the bed. I'll wake up at a minute. That's a question. That's a good insight.
Okay. Yeah.
And yeah, it's definitely you don't turn it off. It's like that Miles Davis thing. It's like, yeah, you know, when do you stop hearing music? I never stop hearing music. It's always on. And
Yeah.
it's like I felt that in that way. So we're touching on it. Maybe or you've already covered this, but I'd be remiss if I didn't ask. When did you realize sort of that level of interest of like art being sort of a calling, a vocation, something you wanted to spend that non-lazy time on, that, you know, putting your interest and your effort into it? Because we all come to that point where, yeah, I'm interested in this. This could be a hobby. This could be an activity that I do. But when it's something that's a vocation, that thing that you can't really turn off, when did you come to that point?
I probably in college. I mean, I had a really great professor who, you know, really brought me into the sort of like the actual art world in terms of, you know, we'd go to New York every year and take a bus out there on spring break. And so it was like, you know, going from I like to do this to this is what this looks like in the world, which I didn't really have access to. I mean, it was the nearest museum from my parents' house. It was like 3.5 hours maybe, and we weren't doing it. So that, I think, like this professor, his name is Stephen Trositz, he died a few years ago, but like his kind of taking me as a student and this group of painters that I was hanging out with, they were, you know, I think it's a group of people that you're with too. They're serious, and it wasn't always easy to be in that group. It was a lot of like really strong personalities, and sometimes I get a little lost in the fray. You know, they like to argue about art. I don't really like to argue about art. But then finally, when there was a point where, I don't know, I made some comment and then about, oh, I don't know, you know, I kind of like, I don't know what I'm doing with this thing. And he's like, you're one of the best painters I know, like you got this. And I just like having that thing where it wasn't about all these other dudes that I was hanging out with and their personalities. And I always thought, oh, they'll be fine. They'll, you know, like they know who they are as artists, and I'm not really sure, but like having him, you know, having my professor kind of lead me along and make it so that it's like, you know what you're doing, and showing me how to, I guess, play the long game of not necessarily basing everything on like an instant success. And actually some of those people I was hanging out with did have a little bit early success, you know, where they were 23 and stuff was happening, and that's not the thing for me. So just learning from him how to live as an artist, it made it more realistic. It wasn't like, oh, well, if you don't give a solo show as soon as you're, it wasn't like that. It was more like, surround yourself with people. I was like, I can do that. It's like, keep working. Okay. And then I would always send pictures and just keep in correspondence, even if I was living overseas or wherever I was. I think having that accountability of like other people paying attention and just supporting, you know, your own interest in each other's work was kind of when I realized, oh yeah, I can, like, being an artist isn't about all these things that you think it is. I mean, it can be, but it's also just about finding that place where you can continue and not beat yourself up every day if it's not working out, because it's generally, you know, it's a long game.
Yeah.
And so just expect that in some ways, and then you can survive it and not get all into your head. So yeah, I think it was like from basically my 20s, and then, you know, now it's just kind of a way of life. I think grad school really solidified it, where I was like, okay, this is, you know, I'm in it. But just early on, no matter what I was doing, no matter what job I had, I was always making something, and sometimes selling it, sometimes not, but just realizing that was kind of like part of how I need to stay in check or whatever.
Yeah, no, I feel that, and you know, in doing this, and this is a sort of always my comparison point. This is the thing that I do, and always trying to, you know, get it over ultimately. And it is definitely one of those things where it's not just something I turn off. Like where someone is like, oh yeah, I just don't think like an artist. You might look at something like, how did they get that color? You start thinking about things in those contexts. And it's because it's a lifestyle. It's not just something that you do for a bit and just turn off and move to another thing. It might be broader. It might be, I'm not just doing this medium or this style of work. It's just like, I'm an artist. However that might look, it might be I'm exploring this area right now in my work or exploring that, but still the sensibility is there.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely a philosophy because it's essentially goes against what we're raised to believe, which is like you have to make stuff you make money. So if you're not making something to make money off it, or if it doesn't function this way, then it's not, then you're a fool, or it's not like wasting your time. But I think that like maybe that's like growing up on a farm where you're like, we didn't really make any money, but we were working all the time. My dad was working all the time. So like, I think my mom was a hippie. It was like, there's this idea that like those constructs of like what it means to be successful, or what it means, this meritocracy, or this idea that this is how it'll work if you do this and this and this. And it's like just knowing that wasn't actually a thing, and having a mom who's a teacher and, part of these systems, and then watching it all, like, yeah, it doesn't mean you get a good retirement or that you get good healthcare or all of these things that are, so I think I always knew that like being an artist it wasn't a problem for them. It wasn't a problem for me. And it was just kind of like, once I, then it's about fighting against maybe a little bit of a system that you're like, I don't have to participate in this way. I can do this. I can make it work, and I can hustle this way or this way, different jobs, and I can still pull it all together. And you have to keep reminding yourself that, because even now I think with Instagram and all the other ways that we're supposed to be like monetizing and branding and all these things, it kind of is getting your head again. You're like, wait, I don't need to do all of that all the time.
Yeah.
That's like that's a system that I can take what I need from it, but I don't need to like give all my time away or all my labor away, or, you're never going to do enough. It's just impossible. So you have to keep bringing it back to what am I going to do today in the studio, and try to have fun too.
It's always getting back to that why. And you're right. You're so right. And especially in that piece about the social media component, like this is a digital thing. This is online. And, in the last year, I've done education around this, like teaching like the next generation of young podcasters. And I've been doing this for a decade and a half, and so one of the dinosaurs of the industry or what have you. But learning a lot of stuff and seeing the ebbs and flows of all of these different things. And, seeing sort of this push out there, and this is why I made that distinction earlier about conversations versus content. And, so it's like, you have these marketing people, hey, you want to go viral, so you got to put it here. I was like, nah, I just have to do the interviews, and hopefully the guest enjoys themselves and they feel it as a win. And I feel it's a win because I don't just talk to people because they have a name. I talk to them because their work interests me, their story interests me. And it might be as superficial as, that's a really cool color. How'd you do that? Or how did you make that? And trying to delve into that further to get the story from the person that goes into that work.
Well, yeah, because you said you saw my work at Future Fair, so you actually saw it in person, and so that's exciting because one thing, speaking of like the digital world, is it's sometimes hard to get a 2-inch screen or whatever to capture everything that's going on texturally, or people don't even know exactly what the material is, and so it's nice to have. You have seen it in person and whatnot, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. That's why I was up there in May. I was talking about earlier, yeah. So moving into sort of a bit of talk around like the work, I want to hear a bit about sort of, it could be something that you worked on and sort of finished recently, or something you're working on currently. But talk about the creative process. Like, where do you start? What are those stages like?
So one of the things, everything. I basically make these big wooden frames, and I have a background piece. So there is this kind of blank canvas that you're looking at. And I usually don't really do a lot of like drawings ahead of time. So often it just comes from like I do think they're a bit self-portrait like, given that I use myself as a reference, but also like even just the psychology of them. I think that they come from a feeling. So, and sometimes it is just like being overwhelmed. A lot of stuff that's going on currently, and it never seems to end. But there's a lot of pretty frustrating and horrible things happening all the time. So sometimes I just get into this mode where it's like I'm making something that I start with the like how I feel, and I'm like, maybe make the pose, and then I draw the body with a marker. I get the figures set up where they need to be to illustrate, to kind of be in the space. And then I kind of work really improvisationally. Like I'll add, like, I don't have everything all drawn out. I don't do the entire drawing and then start the process of tufting it. I generally just start, once I know where the bodies are, I just start with the hair, or I'll start with the thing that I'm trying to, so let's say I put like a swan on the thigh or something like this, right? I'll start there. And then as the days go by, and as I'm sitting there with all this time, as I'm working, I'll come up with other ideas and I add them in. So it's a little bit like when you start drawing on your hand or something, and then you draw, like, like if you kept moving along like that, it's like you just keep thinking. It's more about a process of drawing as a way to think. But in the end, like the figure gets pretty obfuscated with all these, there's all these objects and flowers and, symbols. And it's almost like tattoos. Somewhat they become disguised in the environment. But the one thing that I do notice is like the facial expression and the kind of like the eyes that are looking back at you. You can lose the body, but you're going to still see the face. Yeah. And so as long as that, I want to capture and maintain this kind of expression. So like, even if the figures don't necessarily look like me, it's that face. I'm like, I've made that face. That is me looking like, what is going on? And a lot of times it's feeling really disconnected from nature, and really making these works are about like a place, and it is a place where it's like it's women, right? Because it's a self-referential kind of situation, but it's also, I think, about care and collaboration and kind of Earth Mother stuff, you know what I mean, and like healing and self-compassion, and maybe as I'm working on them, I'm trying to get that into my own life, and because it's like there's so much stuff I can't really do that much about, I suppose. And, you kind of have to sit with some of these feelings. So it's a way of like kind of working through that. And, but also like highlighting, I mean, I really like to reinterpret the body. Obviously there's plenty of imagery out there constantly of women looking a certain way for men, or for, just like the presentation of, and yeah, social media, notwithstanding, internet, everything, ads. But it's like this isn't really like the body becomes this other kind of vessel. It's not really, you're not going to see like I would just say, like, listen, they're stacked in a different way. They're stacked with like information. There's like different things. There's symbolism. You're going to look at something and it'll remind you of something else. It's not really about like, the boobs being like, it's like sexualized or something, right? It's like they're flowers, they're functional. Like, where'd they go? Are they in the foreground or the background? Like, I like that the body, that they're functional, and sort of that thing of self-sufficiency, and that there's like these other functions that you can like, that the body disappears and is so integrated into the background that it just emphasizes this point that we are all part of nature, and we should know that by now. And that we're all made of the same stuff, essentially. I mean, they say, right? So, we're this close to being something else, I would think, right? Materially. So it's kind of that idea of being part of a system. And that there's like, if there's more than one figure, sometimes it's just one, but if there's more than one, it's like they're all doing different things, like, but they have, I don't know, they're into something, right? They're collecting firewood. They're doing these things that are like kind of a useful, like it's like a portrait of them collaborating and existing and helping. Kind of, I guess it's like what I would hope that people are like, and that it's something that's lacking maybe in the day-to-day sort of selfishness of our current culture, right? Everyone's trying to like get what they can and get, it's a little depressing sometimes to see how disconnected people are. So yeah, I guess it's like a rally against that a little bit.
No. I appreciate it. I appreciate that context. I'm, as you're describing it, sort of like the thoughts that go into the work and sort of like the connections and what's presented in there and connecting it to the societal component. I'm looking at like images. Like currently I'm on your site and I'm looking at the Tangle Bead braid series, and I'm like, oh, it's like as you were saying, I was like, oh, there are two people there. Oh, they are working.
Yeah, sometimes you can't see them, or there'll be one that's sometimes upside down, and so you're kind of figuring out who's up.
And just like it's even more questions that start popping up. It's like, how? Like I'm looking at the work, and I was like, oh my gosh, this is really intricate, and I'm seeing it's so many things to like find, so many images to find in there. It's like, oh, there's an apple in that one, axe in the honey pot. Oh, there's flies. There's a beetle right there. There's a playing card, and
remember, I don't know how, but like Highlights magazine, there used to be that thing in the back where you find all the stuff and it's all disguised, and I feel like there's still some element of that. Was my first magazine. It was exciting, and so I feel like there's some part of that. And I also like them to be something that you can't quite see. I mean, it's great to me when there are kind of intentional, like there's blind spots where you can't really quite get your head around the whole thing. And I mean, maybe some of that is just from, we're constantly inundated with images, but even just like outside, there's graffiti stacked on top of an advertisement, stacked on top of like a person. And so they're just visually, the world is operating like that. And so it feels like not too crazy to have all these, it's a little bit of like a stream of consciousness kind of doodling too, add something here, and then it all sort of comes together, and there's a tension that keeps everything kind of in place visually, maybe. No,
it's not a maybe, it's a definite. I see it. I dig it. It's I'm like I said, I've been scoring back through, and I was like, oh right, this is tight. I like this. And I like getting sort of the story that connects sort of the overarching themes that are there. And so I have this question still related within process. So what is it, do you find like maybe the most challenging or monotonous, like understanding that the work is like very labor intensive? And, I'll say this, sometimes I'll get like on a Friday, right? I prep for the upcoming week. I'm like, it's time to make the donuts, to use a dated reference. And I'm going through thinking of what questions I'm going to ask, like checking out old interviews, making sure I'm up to date. And if it's 3 interviews, it's easier. At one point, I was doing 16 interviews per week at one point. So it's a lot of folks to prepare for.
Sure.
It's a lot of questions. It's a lot of work in that sort of way. And it can be monotonous because I try not to ask someone that maybe does a certain style of work the same questions I ask someone else. I feel like that's a disservice. It might be similar territory, but it's not going to be the same question. I try to recycle questions. So what's within your work, within the process that feels like monotonous, that feels like sort of like a challenge? And how do you stay motivated when you get to those points of like, I got to do this?
Yeah, it goes in different phases for sure. I mean, I usually get, of course, excited at the very beginning because it's this drawing and it's a little more freestyle, and there's a lot of things that could happen. And so there's kind of some charge in that, and basically these things, they take time. So you get excited about I don't have a plan. I don't have like a piece of a drawing in front of me. So I am excited about like, what's it going to look like? What's going to happen, and that can be, it comes in waves. And then there's the tediousness of, it gets to a point where you're filling in. And so I use basically like a wooden old-timey Oxford hand punching tool. So a lot of it is just, if you think of like a stick and poke tattoo, right? So it's like bam, 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 like that. But it's slow. And so it's a little bit like stippling or drawing or something like that. But then it gets to a point where, it's a big surface. One piece I made last year was 10 feet wide. And so there's just a lot of hours, and I guess I listen to podcasts. I try to find like things so that it's like, okay, today you'll just focus on this part, and I kind of go big to little to big to little all the time, where sometimes it's just, finding the thing that you can be interested in one day. And then the hard part is just like, when there's basically gaps where you can see the background and you just know you have to fill it in, but it's more like the in between, which isn't, so it doesn't mean it's not important. It doesn't mean it's not like, but there's just all these little gaps. So sometimes the very end of a piece is actually really hard because it looks almost done and people say, oh yeah, you're really close. And I'm like, it's still like another 15 hours away, and it's 15 hours of tedious, stuff. What I'll do is I'll turn it around because I'm working on the back when I'm working on this stuff. So I have the drawing. I'm working with either the little wooden tool, or I have a machine tufting gun, like a handheld one. Yeah. And I think those are pretty ubiquitous on the internet. People are always making stuff. I think most people know those tufting guns by now. But I turn it around and then I'll put little toothpicks through to mark where the little gaps are. And then it's turning it back. And so even just that little game of like, okay, now there's these toothpicks, it gives me a sense of like how long, or there's something that I can mark and go, okay, I have 70 spots to finish. And then you hear them clink and hit the ground, and maybe there's something in my little squirrel brain that's like, okay, that was satisfying. Like, and you see less of them. Okay, I feel like I'm getting somewhere, because you're just convincing yourself that it's going to be fine. And it's really, and it's not like something I can often, if I can get help, sometimes I've been able to hire people, but it's a lot of it because it's so intuitive, and because I kind of jump around. I'll work on one part, work another part. So there's a lot of disconnected parts that it's really, I have to finish it. It's not like there's a map and I can say, here's the diagram. So it gets long. So sometimes I'll just work on a small, like, it's like if I work on a big piece, the next one will be smaller. So I can kind of keep myself from getting, totally despondent, or just physically not just being the hunchback of Santee Alley over here. So it's tough because it is physically, and I'll be 45 in August. So I don't know, I got to make sure I'm taking care of myself so I don't, carpal tunnel, all that kind of stuff. So it's a little bit of like a balancing act physically. And I just do different things. So sometimes I'll just have a new piece that I'll just leave the old one for a while. I got it. And if there's no deadline, I'll leave it, and then I'll work on something else and just draw, or, so, but there's definitely phases, and it doesn't, even the phases of it being something I'm like, I don't like it, and I don't know if I'm going to like it, but you're already in it so far. And it can be hard to pull everything out, so you have to trust yourself enough to keep going. And that just, I don't know, I have studio mates now. So I'm in this building with a bunch of other artists. And so sometimes I'll bother them and have them give me like a pep talk or something and be like, help me. Yeah.
Has it gotten like sort of like, what part of that has gotten maybe sort of easier in that time? And I say it because of this. Like, I would do these interviews, and early on starting out, I'm like, this is like creative blind dating. That's always the way I would look. It's like I know a few things about this person. I know they like their work. I know we're going to do this interview, but I'm trying to see who they are as a person in addition to what their work is, and kind of connecting those dots. And sometimes it's just like, oh, this person hates me, without much context. And then it's like, oh no, they're shy, or whatever the thing might be. And I would almost put it off with this sort of like, I have the first conversation with someone and it's like, oh, they hate me. I was bad. I did ask poor questions. I didn't do whatever. It's always on me. And then that would carry over into those next interviews. And I'm like, damn. And really none of it's true, but it's all in my head. And I would go to this thing, and the thing you had mentioned about the sort of intuitive nature, I would say, maybe I should have someone else take a stab at these questions. Maybe my questions are just off the mark all the time, right? And maybe that's bleeding into how this conversation goes, right? And I'm like, nah, no one's going to have that perspective. No one's going to connect those dots in that way. That has to be me. And being able to maybe bring in an assistant here to maybe do some of the stuff that I'm not as efficient in, or that it just is another piece of time. I had to, at one point, I talked to a guy who was friends with, I was working with, in this data job that I had, and he'd asked me, how long does it take for you to produce one thing, one episode, one conversation?
Yeah.
I was like, 6 hours.
Yeah.
Just like, so how many you're doing a week?
Yeah, that's why I'm worried about you. I'm just kidding. Yeah, that's a lot of time. I mean, if it'd be different if maybe you could sneak in some stuff and you got your day job and you're doing it there and kind of stacking the clock. But that's a lot of time. And I would imagine editing would be tedious. And like the exciting part would be talking and, having a good conversation. But then it's analyzing and figuring out what stuff to cut out and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, I mean, I think it's at a certain point, a lot of that is my own, internal dialogue to feel like what I need to get through, to stick with a piece and be like, I like it. Because I'm always trying to throw a wrench in my works a little bit. I don't want to get too obvious or something, right? So even just color my palette, I'm trying to mess with that all the time lately, just to try to be like, because I started out all the colors, right? And then I'm doing more monochromatic stuff. And now I'm like, looking, it's like, that seems a little too easier. I've done that. So then, and now I'm trying to like trick myself a little bit more. And so it can get uncomfortable, but ultimately I think it's just like, just keep doing it. And that's it's nice to have a studio that's not in my house. Because then I'd show up, it's like, this is the job and I come here and there's other people working. So you kind of feed off that energy where it's like, and it's also not always about doing something 100% the whole time. It's not like, whistle while you work, chip, chip, chip. It's sometimes you sit around, sometimes like yesterday I fell asleep, which I don't normally do, but it's so hot. And so I was just like, man, I don't really feel like doing anything. And I was just, slumped over, and all of a sudden half an hour later, I was like, I feel a little better. That was probably, I needed to shut it down. But yeah, it's a little bit of a balancing act, to try to get yourself to stay motivated, especially when, like right now, currently, I don't really have anything coming up that's driving me in a panic, where I think before, especially the last year, I had a lot of stuff. So it was like, I kind of would make lists and I had a calendar and I was like, okay, you got to do this by this, and, set these kind of goals essentially. And then now it's like, well, there's no one really requiring anything. So I just have to create a reason, I guess. And then also just trust that something will pop up and then I'll be ready. I got a bunch of stuff ready to go. Knock, knock. Anybody call it, the phone is not ringing off the hook, but it's all right. That's also a difficult thing, because right now the art market is slowing down and it's an election year and there's all these things that I don't even want to think about, but that has an effect. And so, yeah, but this is not my first rodeo. And I feel like that's where it's been a long time. And I've been doing it long enough that it's like success is the surprise. And mostly it's like about just keep doing it. And yeah.
Yeah. I feel you, keeping one's head down, doing the thing. And, I'm not a person that really celebrates any of the stuff that I do. It's like, it's just more work for me to do. And it's like, I'm happy to do the work. That's sort of the thing for me. And, I try to always, in any of this, as I was touching on earlier, and I got like one more question after this before I move into the rapid fire portion, but it's this sort of like thing, like we talk about brands, we talk about themes, we talk about things that we always sort of return to, these hallmarks. I try not to do the typical, hey, tell me about your work. Oh my God, it's so interesting. I feel like you've had that interview before. I feel like people have had those interviews before. So I'd like to delve deeper. And that's in part maybe sort of the structure of how some of the questions are, like let's connect those dots, as I said before. But even in the rapid fire portion as well, which you'll become aware of very soon. But it's sort of this thing of like, when someone listens to this, what makes it unique is it's, you're talking with artists, talking with creative folks, you're talking with people who are in this cultural industry and getting sort of what their story is and connecting those dots. And it's a sort of a mix of multiple things. It's these unique questions, this unique way of connecting things, and it's curated in this sort of way. So for you, if you're thinking about what your work is as a brand, what would be like the three primary like themes that always show up? I've heard a few. I've heard sort of like collaboration. I've heard sort of like people are working together. It's the land, it's nature, it's women, it's all of these different things. But I want to hear from you. I don't want to sit here and mansplain.
Yeah, I mean, I would say maximalism is a theme, I think just really visually stacking and packing everything in there in this way. Like I want it to feel verdant and lush and like it's own ecosystem in a funny way. And then, yeah, I mean, feminism or matriarchy. I think we could try that out one of these days. It's pretty depressing how, yeah, there's just a lot of damaging egos and people in power and things that it's wild. How we've taken, let's say, even whatever, since the Industrial Revolution, or in the past couple hundred years, that human beings have been operating in this capitalist society and stepping away from being more collaborative. It's like it doesn't take long before the whole system is shatters. So like I don't know, the earth will make it, like it'll continue somehow, right? It's built a million years later or something, but it's depressing. So I always think of matriarchy and feminism as part of nature. And yeah, I guess those are some of the themes, and also maybe just like the way they're constructed, the slow pace, just even that as a counter to the idea of like production in art. And so you're supposed to find the simplest way, the sexiest way to knock something out. And then hopefully you just keep them coming. You got your thing, and then you can just mass produce, but then you're everybody else. Then like, why am I could work at a bank. Like, what am I doing? So I think it's like, yeah, I work hard. I will slowly chip away at this. I'll do it, but it's not, there's only so fast you can go. And it's not going to be something that I'm going to send to somebody else to make or whatever, mass produce. I just think it's like, that's not what the point is. So I think even just the way it's made is a philosophy, and maybe it's a little old fashioned, okay, so what?
That's great. I like the way that you closed that out. Oh, that's really good. So shout out to you on that. All right. So I think in this conversation, we've established some goodwill. We're both hard workers. We're lazy.
I'm not going to arm wrestle you. You look like it.
Yeah, I can lift a few weights. But so I want to hit you with this rapid fire thing. I got a couple of them. And I got 4 of them for you. So okay. As I always tell folks, don't overthink these. It's like, like whatever it's like I said what I said, whatever the answer is the answer. All right. So here's the first one. Long hours, long days, right? And it always takes something to unwind. And I always connect to food, right? So what is a comfort food for you?
Probably in LA, Mexican food for sure. I'm nothing like a street taco, and, definitely some margaritas here and there.
Good answer. If you could visit one place in the world, where would it be?
Ooh, I mean, I really would like to go to Japan. It could be, it's an endless list though. I mean, like Morocco, but I think Japan, because I like that idea of like people that know how to do something, like their specialty, there's like people that specialize. And we watched this thing on Saturday morning where it's this NHK show. It's just people that bike around Japan and then they go visit places, and these guys know what they're doing. They've been doing it 1,000 years. Like, I like that idea of like, this is what I do. And no one's going, well, what if you did, who's your brand? That you just let them do it. Make the candy, make the thing. It's so good. Yeah.
That's great. I'm going to look for that because I'm now at day 305 of studying Japanese, and it's on the short list. I definitely want to go. It's because of things like that. That like I have this book. Yeah, I have this right. It's in my studio, the Gambante book. It's just go for it. Just do your thing. It's no such thing as good luck. It's just like it'll happen because you're putting effort.
Yeah.
And I try to apply that in doing this, being a podcaster and having all of these different things every other week. What's the milestone? How do you get here? How do you determine success? And it's like, just going to keep doing everything else to sort itself out.
Yeah.
What is one book or movie? Because, we got to go high level, low level. One book or one movie that you really dig, that you're really into, like, what you've read the most or watched the most, I guess.
So that's a tricky one because I feel like it's like the most, to me, I'm always like, what's the most recent book that I read that I'm just still thinking about, or movie. I mean, I like Battle for Algiers. That like really stuck with me. I like, yeah, I don't know. I'm trying to think. Because a lot of the times I read a lot more like novels, and I'm really into storytelling, right? So it's not really, sometimes it's people, maybe it would be an art book, but I feel like just like I just read the A Long Petal of the Sea, Israel Allende. And that one, like I love like a historical kind of, to think back of like, we're not the first ones who've dealt with any of these situations. So maybe it gives us a little bit of hope. And so that's talking about these refugees that come from Spain and they're living in, you know, in South America. And it's this whole history of like this, of the immigrant situation. And so I feel like those are good stories to kind of keep revisit. And so, yeah, maybe that's just the most recent one that I read that I'm still, I guess, thinking about. Yeah, I don't know.
No, it's good. I've been rereading, audiobooks. I'm an audio guy. It's always headsets on me or always earbuds in my ears. But I was rereading this book called Hitmakers by what's this dude's name? Derek Thompson. And it's kind of just talking about the science of like popularity in the digital age.
Uh,
Seeing these different things. It's one design concept that he keeps pushing across that really I applied it because, you take into account, like I talk to people and some of the guests that I have on, we become friends. It's like, oh, cool, we're friends now. And, you'll hear like, oh, I think your podcast is this, or I think what you do is a combination of this. So I did a, test. I kind of took almost in a Mad Libs way, took like, what I do is this version of this. And this concept of Maya is its most advanced yet acceptable. So we like things that are familiar. And I'm like, all right, I've heard the James Lipton thing. I've heard the Nardwuar thing. I've heard the Charlie Rose, and I've heard the Anthony Bourdain thing. So I
yeah.
was like, if I'm taking these different influences, and most of which of them I do take influence from, I was like, I do this. I'm this version of what they do. And I sent it to a marketing person who I was going to work with. And they was like, no, that's exactly what you do. Like, how did you come up with that? I was like, Maya thinking.
Oh,
And it
yeah.
all came from this book or what have you of determining what's ahead. And the example that they used in it, which was so interesting, they were talking about how years ago, let's say a new company popping up, they would say this company is the eBay of this.
Mhm.
Like Airbnb is the eBay of rentals.
Yeah.
And I was like, that's something there. People like what's familiar.
Yeah. 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 Well, that's especially if your work is in data and you're kind of like, that's like a mind like that you can apply, where I feel like I would joke, and when people say, where are you from? Because it's like, I'm from some place that's really remote and, not very close to anything. So I always joke and, oh, well, it's the Manhattan of the Midwest, and people really, and I'm like, no, it's not. But like, to kind of throw those comparisons, and I usually do it in a joking way, but yeah, I wonder how that would apply to that kind of logic, or like my art, or I'm not sure.
It's
I'm
it's
I do know that I'm the only one with my particular name, so hopefully that'll hold me down for a while, where it won't be nobody else is me yet.
first of her
There's
name.
AI. We don't know what's going to happen. I can't even deal with that.
Look, I do a podcast, and having all of those different pieces of my voice out there, right? I am terrified. It's like, oh, here's Rob. Like, no.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, I heard this thing because I just tried to watch a little bit of Beverly Hills Cop 3 last night, and I heard that a lot of that was AI. And so then I was looking, I'm like, is Eddie Murphy, is he real right now? Is it like, I don't know. There's some crazy stuff that happens in that movie where I'm like, it's yeah. Anyway, that's the world we live in. You might start to question like, who's really, are they there, or are they in a studio someplace else? Or I don't get it, but I don't think I don't think I'm have to worry about it too much for a while. But it's definitely a strange the digital world as yet another part of our personality that can be, I guess, manipulated, or like managed in some ways, is kind of unnerving.
But I think you keyed in on one of the things, and I definitely will hit this last rapid fire, but I think you keyed in on one of those things that's a key distinction that people who get it really know and recognize. Is sort of the reality of it is kind of, not handing this off for someone else to mass produce. If it's being able to be mass produced, it's able to be replicated. And I tend to talk about sort of imperfections. I talk about the things that make it unique and human. And I think in part, that's why people kind of gravitate towards this. I'm always super privileged when someone such as yourself will come on and spend an hour and change with me to talk
Yeah.
about their work and their insights and musings, because it's a real thing. It's not like a bunch of scripted AI questions with an AI
Yeah.
test. I mean,
Yeah.
eventually it may replace me because I'm almost 40, so I'm getting a little tired. But it's you want to make sure it has something that feels real, that feels authentic, and I think that's what people value.
Yeah, I think there's you got to see what the kids are doing. And like, I do think that there is a push against, we think it's like, it's just going to be this exponential direction going one way, and it's just going to get more and more, dystopic. But then at the same time, there are kids that are like, I got off social media and I do this differently because I couldn't take it. And they can they do, they do have some sense of what's going on, and are, working against some of the stuff that I feel like maybe needs to happen to kind of slow things down to get your mind right again. So I think that it's always interesting to hear what the kids are up to and stuff. Too. But yeah.
So this is the last one I got for you, and I'm very curious. I'm always curious about the habits of artists. We're workaholics, we're problem solvers, we do all of these different things, and sometimes we don't take those times, those moments, whether it be weekly, whether it be in the day, to kind of disconnect, reset up here. Do you have a mindfulness practice? Are you like, you got to run, you got to meditate, you got to hit the gym, or whatever the thing might be? Do you have a mindfulness practice?
Yeah, I mean, I go through phases. It's hard because I think the tricky thing is I'll think, oh God, it's like snapping yourself out of that work mode a little bit and do, a little gym class and kind of like take that time. And so usually if I do that in the morning, that starts the day off a little better. I have a hard time doing that at the end of the day. I'll definitely like chill at the end of the day or something, or, we live near a park, take a walk, all that kind of stuff. But I think if I do, it's always getting in the morning kind of organized so that when I come here, it's built in, and then I'm here and I don't have to think about getting back or getting out of here to try to keep some schedule. So I think that's what I try to do. And it's not like doesn't always work, not every day. But yeah, trying to find that kind of balance so that you're taking care of yourself, and that also that it just getting any kind of routine, it makes you feel a little bit more functional. Like, okay, see, I am an adult and I'm doing things this way. I'm not just like, kind of scattered all over the place, or just maybe sometimes making art can be avoidant. It's like, I'd rather be doing this than I'll do this. And, it's trying to find that balance so that it all works. Because you can't avoid a lot of that other stuff in your life. But if I do like a gym class or something, then I'm thinking, okay, it gives me a chance to think too, and kind of in more of an organizational mindset as I'm suffering through some, routine. But then if I'm here, I often get a little lost, and I'm not planning in the same way. I'm in the flow or whatever. So I think, that helps to have a little thing right in the morning.
That's super important, and I do the same thing. I get
Yeah.
up, sort it out, and it starts things off like right, and just being a creature of routine, it's like running, gym, coffee, and then here we are. We're engaged. I'm properly set up, properly dipped.
Yeah. Yeah. You set your expectations too for the day. It allows you to like take that time then, you know what I mean? It's all about kind of finding a strategy so that you can do something maybe a bit more unconventional, but that you're doing it in a way that like kind of makes sense, and then it's easier to maintain. And then when you want to take a break, then you do. I don't know. It's hard when you just think you got to do. I think the trick is getting out of this idea of like, well, this is what people they work a 40-hour work week, and this is how that goes. And so you try to apply that to an art practice. Sometimes it doesn't always work. So some days are shorter, some days are longer, some days you know what you're doing, some days you're like, this is not mentally, like, this is not helping my mind to just scrutinize myself or think that I'm failing. So sometimes you just got to leave it and let it shut the door, so it's, but it changes, and it's all part of, different phases of my life. It's looked different, but this is what I got going on right now. Yeah.
Right. And that's kind of it for the podcast, for the you're off the hot seat. So thank you. There's two things I want to do as we close out here. One, I want to again thank you for coming on, spending some time with me, and two, I want to give you the space and the opportunity to share with the listeners where they can follow you on social media, website, all of that good stuff, to check out images of your work and kind of stay up to date with you. So the floor is yours.
Okay. Yeah. So my name is the tricky thing. So it's Liv and then Aanrud. That's the whole works at, .com is my website. And then on Instagram, it's just my name. I'm not messing around with any moniker or anything to throw anybody off. So you just kind of got to write it out or look on your site, I suppose. And then there's no one else with my name. So that's the easy part. And then I guess on my website and also on Instagram, I'll post when things are coming up and when I have some, shows and anything coming up. That's where I usually post them. That's about it.
And there you have it, folks. I want to again thank Liv Aanrud for coming on to the podcast. And I'm Rob.Liv, saying that there's art, culture, and community in and around your neck of the woods. You've just got to look for it.